بر محمد وآل محمد صلوات. رحم الله من قرأ الفاتحة. Let us recite one more salawat for all the Mazlumeen of Jannatul Baqi, Imam Hassan Mujtaba, Imam Zainul Abidin, Imam Muhammad al-Baqir and Imam Jafar al-Sadiq. Salawatullah wa salamu alayhim ajma'in. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله الذي لا يبلغ مدحته القائلون ولا يحصي نعماه العادون ولا يؤدي حقه المجتهدون الذي لا يدركه بعد الحمم ولا يناله غوص الفتن الذي ليس لصفته حد محدود ولا نعت موجود ولا وقت معدود ولا أجل ممدود. فترى الخلائق بقدرته ونشر الرياح برحمته ووتد بالصخور ميدان أرضه. والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم. والصلاة والسلام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين واللعن الله على أعدائهم أجمعين. قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه المجيد وفرقان الحميد: أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وكونوا مع الصادقين. آمنا بالله وصدق الله العلي العظيم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Tawbah, the 9th surah, which we do, and one of the unique qualities of this surah is that we start this surah without a Bismillah, the only surah in the Quran that we start without Bismillah. And in this, in the ayah number 119, Allah says, O you who believe, Ittaqullah, be careful, adopt taqwa and be always with the true ones. Now when we look at this Quranic command, it is addressed to first those who have brought faith, and it has two specific instructions. The first is to adopt taqwa, and as we have discussed just last week, taqwa constitutes of three aspects. First and foremost, protecting oneself from sins. Second is to be conscious of Allah in everything that we do. And third is total obedience to all His commands, that is to perform all His wajibats and to keep away from all that is haram. And then at the same time, the second command is to be with the truthful ones at all times. So the question that we begin is, who are these truthful ones and what are we looking at? So we ask none other than the one upon whom the Quran was revealed, Muhammad Mustafa Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, to clarify for us who these truthful people are that we need to be amongst with. And these, if we look at the various ahadith of Rasulullah, these are none other than the Ahlul-bayt of Rasulullah, Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. And one primary reference is enough for our discussion, and then we move forward. There are many references to this. However, one is enough for us. When Rasulullah says, Inni tarikun fikum thaqalain, kitab Allahi wa itrati ahlu bayti, Man tamassaka bihima lan tadillu ba'di. Rasulullah very clearly says that I am leaving behind two weighty things, the book of Allah and my progeny, the Ahlul-bayt. Whoever holds tightly unto them both will never go astray. In this particular hadith, there are many lessons that we can get. However, for how to establish the truthful ones, is this not only enough that Ahlul-bayt has been placed only with the Quran, and that there is nothing in between them, and therefore these are the two thaqal, what we call thaqalain, the weighty things that Rasulullah left behind. And this is not only a concept of the Ahlul Shia. Even in the Ahlul Sunnah, this hadith is there in 5 out of the 6 most authentic books of the Ahlul Sunnah as well. The very same hadith. In fact, there is a hadith that is emphasizing that on the day of Qiyamah, Allah will ask us, how did you treat these two? How did you treat the Quran and how did you treat the Ahlul Bayt, the Thaqalain that Rasulullah left behind? Now, when we see this, the term tarikun, and this hadith has been narrated on a couple of occasions, not only on Ghadir, but on a couple of occasions in the life of Rasulullah. And when he says tarikun, meaning I am leaving behind, meaning that I will not be amongst you when you will have to be with these two. So this is like a wasiyah that he says that after my departure, there are going to be these two things that if you hold them onto both of them, that will be your guidance. Lan tadillu ba'di. Never ever will you go astray. The same lan that has been used, that never ever will you be able to see Allah. The same lan has been used as never ever you will go astray if you hold on to both of these thaqalain tightly and move forward with it. Now, Rasulullah also stresses by saying, وَهُمْ مَا لَا يَفْتَرِقَانِ. They will not differ ever between them. There is never going to be a difference between the Quran and the Ahlul Bayt ever until they meet me on the day at the pond of Kawthar. What this means is that the Quran is the book of Allah and the Ahlul Bayt is the living Quran who lived only by the Quran. And that there is no difference. In fact, there is also an authentic hadith that tells us that if you come across a hadith that is in contradiction with the Quran, throw it across the wall and do not accept it. This is a principle of how to establish, one of the principles of how to establish the authenticity and veracity of a hadith. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala. So today we have gathered to mourn the sixth of the Aimma alayhimus salam, whose name is Abu Muhammad Ja'far ibn Muhammad as-Sadiq salawatullahi wa salamu alayhima, whose father, as we know, is the fifth Imam, Imam Muhammad al-Baqir salawatullahi wa salamu alayk. And his mother was Farwa, who was the daughter of Qasim bin Muhammad bin Abi Bakr. Muhammad bin Abi Bakr was the son of Abu Bakr, the first Caliph of the Muslims, but he was one whom his mother brought when he was still suckling and when she was married to Amir al-Mu'mineen, and Amir al-Mu'mineen himself has raised Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr. And his daughter is the mother of the sixth Imam. Imam was born on 17th Rabiul Awwal in the year 83 Hijrah, the same date that we have for the birth of Rasulullah in the year 83 Hijrah. And his birthplace is Medina. His kunniya, some of his titles are As-Sadiq, one that we know, veracious, truthful, As-Sabir, the steadfast, Al-Fadil, the virtuous, At-Tahir, the pure, Al-Kafil, the supporter. And one of the most important titles of the sixth Imam is Al-Amud al-Sharaf, meaning the pillar of honor. Imam Sadiq alayhi salam was a pillar of honor. His martyrdom was on 25th of Shawwal in the year 148 Hijrah, and he is buried in Jannatul Baqi, Medina, and he died and was martyred at the age of 65. In this short life, He lived 12 years with his grandfather under the imamat of Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi salam, 19 years with his father Imam Muhammad al-Baqir alayhi salam, and 34 years of his own imamat. He was killed by the third Caliph of Banu Abbas, Mansur al-Diwanaki, and Imam's traits, like all his predecessors, was generosity, knowledge, humility, piety. And Imam was a staunch defender. This is why he is called Pillar of Honor. He was a staunch defender of the Muslims and public rights. Thus, he was very much liked and honored by the general public, but he was hated by the rulers of the time because of his justice, because of his emphasis on Muslims and public rights. Imam saw various periods of the Banu Umayyah and the Banu Abbas, and he is sixth in line of the Imams of the Ahlul-bayt. Now, one of the most important aspects is that we are called and identified as the Ja'fariya school, based on the name of our sixth Imam, Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq, on his first name. And we call not ourselves Muslims only, we call ourselves Shia Ithna Asharis, and we also call ourselves the Ja'fariya. Muslims is because of the Shahadatain that we do. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Shia because we are followers of the very first Imam, Amir al-Mu'mineen. Ithna Ashari is because we have 12 Imams. And Ja'fari, why are we called Ja'fari, is something that we must also understand. And this is because one of the most important aspect of this emphasis is that Imam got time to propagate knowledge. The time and the opportunity that the sixth Imam got, none of the other Imams of the Ahlul-bayt alayhi salam got, in terms of propagating truthful knowledge from basis of the Quran and the realities as that have been created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is why we call ourselves Ja'fari. And Ja'fari deen and way of life is not like any other ways of life. It is based on knowledge, and that is why there is a lot of emphasis on acquiring knowledge, the truthful and veracious knowledge, so that we may be able to call and give pride to our Imam that we are real followers of the madhab of Ja'fari. In fact, there is a hadith of the sixth Imam which says, "Be a pride to us by following our rulings. Do not be somebody who is going to bring upon shame, such that if you move on the street, people will say he is an excellent person as a personality. The only defect is he is a follower of the Ahlul-bayt." This is how we need to train ourselves. This is how we need to train our children. This is how we need to move forward in life. And this is what it means by being Ja'fari. Now, Imam's influence was not only upon the Shias, the non-Shias, the non-Muslims, even the atheists were influenced by the Imam. Why? And when we look at his timeline, we see that there are many personalities who are revered by the others or other madhahib that have actually said praise, have given praise to the Imam that we follow. But unfortunate as it may be, they do not follow the Imam. Like, for example, during his time, there were many schools that were developing. One of the most important aspects was there were lots of philosophies that were coming and to the Muslim world and were being translated into the local language, especially Arabic. There were the Greek philosophies, there was the ancient philosophies from Persia and the Sanskrit philosophies that were coming into the Muslim world and being propagated. And Imam had to make debates so that he may advise and he may teach the people the correct approach to understanding all these concepts and realities. Imam was thus the pivot of distinguishing between right and wrong. between what was a reality and what was just a concept or a superstition or whatever is a theory that is not on the basis of reality. Two of the four Imams of fiqh of Ahlul Sunnah were contemporaries of the Imam. Imam Malik ibn Anas, who was born in 93 Hijrah, 10 years younger to Imam Sadiq alayhi salam. He was born in Medina, he lived in Medina, and he died in Medina, except that he went for Hajj, he never left Medina. And the second one is Imam Abu Hanifa, who is Nu'man bin Thabit, who was born in the year 80 Hijrah, and he was 3 years older to the Imam of Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, and he was living in Kufa. And he is also known as Imam al-Azam in the Ahlul Sunnah, as the greatest of all the four Imams of fiqh that they have in the Ahlul Sunnah. Now, to look at just a couple of testimonies of who the Imam was and how people viewed him. First and foremost, we look at the Shia perspective. For example, we had Imam's uncle, Zayd bin Ali, who was the son of our fourth Imam, Imam Zainul Abidin, salawatullah wasalamu alayhi. The brother of the fifth Imam and the uncle of the sixth Imam. And he was a very pious man, and is also one of the two sources of Sahifa Sajjadiyah that we have. Sahifa Sajjadiyah has come to us through two major sources from Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi salam. One is through Imam Muhammad al-Baqir alayhi salam, and the other is through Zayd bin Ali, his brother. And these are the two main sources of how Sahifa Sajjadiyah came to us. And the chain goes on, and Zayd was a personality who stood against injustice. In fact, he even made a revolt by standing against the tyrants and the rulers for establishing justice, but he was not only tortured, he was even killed. In fact, his son was even burnt alive. This is how the Muslims or the Ummah did dhulm upon him and his family. And he says that he did not stand against the tyrants to obtain power the way Banu Abbas stood up against Banu Umayyah. He stood against the tyrants to establish Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahi anil Munkar. And he is an uncle of the sixth Imam, but he describes the sixth Imam, Imam as-Sadiq, in this manner. He says, in every era, there will be someone from us, the Ahlul-bayt, as the Hujjah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on this earth. And on the day of Qiyamah, he says, Allah will ask the people, did you seek your guidance from my Hujjah or not? This is a question we will be asked. What was your source of guidance? Did you finally land at the door of the Ahlul-bayt, who were my Hujjah, established proof of mine or not, or otherwise? And he says, and at this time, the Hujjah of our time is my nephew, Ja'far ibn Muhammad as-Sadiq, salawatullah wasalamu alayhi. And then he emphasizes this by saying, whoever follows him will never be misguided, and whoever opposes him will never be guided. This is the Hujjah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now when we look at the Ahl Sunnah, for example, Imam al-Malik, who was in Medina all the time, and he also got some knowledge from Imam Sadiq alayhi salam. He says, from the perspective of knowledge, this is the wordings of Imam Malik of the Ahl Sunnah, he says, from the perspective of knowledge, righteousness and virtuousness and spirituality, no eyes have ever seen, nor any ears have ever heard, nor any thoughts have ever gone into the hearts. None is better, rather is even not equal to in these matters like Ja'far ibn Muhammad. So this is how even the Ahl Sunnah's Imam of fiqh, people who follow the Imam of fiqh, Imam Maliki, view Imam Maliki's views about Imam Sadiq alayhi salam. And Imam al-Azam Abu Hanifa, for whom we have many events, we have three very important statements that he has made in his life about Imam Sadiq. The first is, he says, and he is one who has studied for 2 years, and he says, I haven't seen anyone more learned in fiqh and jurisprudence than Ja'far as-Sadiq. That is his first statement. And the second one is the most famous statement where he says, Lawla sannatan lakal halakal Nu'man. Had it not been for the 2 years that he studied under Imam Sadiq alayhi salam in Medina seeking knowledge, Nu'man, which is the first name of Imam Abu Hanifa, would have perished. And this is an acknowledgement that whilst all other personalities sought knowledge, the Imam of the Ahlul-bayt was never seen going to any teacher to learn. And when we see, for example, even the 10th Imam, when Mutawakkil sent a teacher to teach the 10th Imam, and when he asked the 10th Imam, for example, asked the teacher, how is that boy? And the teacher became so outraged and says, how dare you call him just a boy? Wallah, he is not my student, he is my teacher. He teaches me more than I can even learn. This is what the Imams of Ahlul-bayt are. And then there is a third statement, which is with an event which is very interesting also. And that is that Abu Hanifa was in a debate with Imam Sadiq alayhi salam in the presence of Mansur ad-Diwanaki. They do not tell us how this debate happened, but there was a debate in which Abu Hanifa was asking questions and Imam Sadiq was answering questions. And for every question that Abu Hanifa asked, and this is a statement in his book that he narrates about Imam Sadiq, and he says, for every time the Imam was asked of a question, he would answer in a particular manner, saying, the Madinites say like this, meaning Imam Maliki, and his followers say it like this. The Kufans, meaning you and your followers, say it like this. And our opinion, that is the Ahlul-bayt's opinion, is like this. Meaning that sometimes Abu Hanifa says, sometimes the Madinites were wrong, sometimes the Kufans were wrong, sometimes both of us were wrong, but the real opinion and the real knowledge came from Imam Sadiq alayhi salam. And then he writes this statement and he says that he would first explain what the others say and then give the truthful opinion before giving his perspective of the issue. And he says, it is indeed true. Imam Abu Hanifa says, it is indeed true that the most learned of all is one who knows the different opinions of the others on the same subject before he gives his own opinion. That is the level of Imam Sadiq alayhi salam. Imam was the nucleus of knowledge. Imam's doors were always open for people to come and ask. And people used to come and they used to be taught, and Imam used to give them lessons practically as well as theoretically, as we know that in the Masjid of Medina, there were more than 4,000 students who were full-time studying under the Imam and for under various subjects. Within all varieties of thoughts and philosophies, he made truth prevail, whether it was in theology, Sharia, tafsir of Quran, or hadith of Rasulullah. Imam was given the opportunity, and he was blessed by this opportunity so that he may expand on the knowledge that was there. And a companion of the Imam in Kufa narrates. Now Imam is in Medina. He is in Kufa. He is a companion of the Imam because he has studied under the Imam, and he says, I have personally seen 900 scholars, not students, 900 scholars in the Masjid of Kufa saying, and each and every one of them would say, Haddathani Ja'far ibn Muhammad. This has been narrated by Ja'far ibn Muhammad. 900 scholars in Kufa, besides the 4,000 that were there in Medina. That is how Imam had influence, and this is how he was. A Sunni scholar says people who narrated traditions from Imam Sadiq alayhi salam came from various backgrounds, having different religious beliefs, and were followers of different madhahib, even non-Muslim backgrounds. they were influenced by the Imam's teachings. Imam's teachings were such that even students were raised to such levels that sometimes when the Imam was asked to discuss or debate with any of them, he would say, discuss this with this of my student, and if there is any further questions, you can come to me. Their students of Imam were at that level. Imam had trained them to that level, so much so that whenever there came debating issues, he would ask them to first debate with his student. And then if there was a defeat, if at all, then the debate would be referred to the Imam, who would clarify the situation. And among his students were specialists in theology, Quran, Hadith, Fiqh, and many other sciences. Another Sunni scholar by the name of Hanafi al-Bastani, he says, ulamas, that is scholars, not only students, even the learned would rush to the door of the Imam to get an opportunity to learn from him, whilst the pious people would rush to his house to get the nur of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There is a very interesting hadith of the Imam. He says, whenever you hear a hadith from us, that is the Ahlul-bayt, and specifically from him, that is Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, and if we do not give you a chain, one of the requirements of saying hadith is that you give a chain of how you got it. And Imam says, if we do not give you a chain of that hadith, then be assured that I have heard it from my father Imam Baqir, who has heard it from my grandfather Imam Sajjad, who has heard it from his father Imam Hussein, who has heard it from his father Amir al-Mu'mineen, who has heard it from Muhammad Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, who has been told by Jibreel, who has been instructed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is how solid the chain is of the Imam's words, that there is no challenge whatsoever that it has come from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through the golden chain, as we say, which is unbreakable. This in itself is a very intense statement. And this also is because the Imam is from min itrati, the same hadith of Thaqalain, that I have left behind the Quran and my itrat. Very interesting events in the life of Imam. One day, for example, Abu Hanifa was waiting at the door so that he could meet the Imam. Now, Imam at that time was not aged, nor was he sick or weak at that time, but when he was told, he came out of the house holding a stick. So when Abu Hanifa saw that Imam is holding a stick, so Abu Hanifa inquired, "Oh, Mawla, what is the problem? Are you sick? Are you not well? Why are you holding a stick today?" Imam explained that he was holding this stick not because he was weak or sick or old age, but because of obtaining the barakah from this stick, because this stick belongs to Rasulullah. This asa is of Rasulullah. When Abu Hanifa heard this statement from Imam, it was overwhelming for him, and he rushed to kiss the stick. And he kissed the stick that was held by Imam, which he told him was the stick of Rasulullah. So Imam told him and asked him a question. Why did you kiss the stick? It is lifeless. And he says, because it has a nisbat, a connection to Rasulullah whom I love. And therefore it is something that I will revere. So Imam says, but the hand holding the stick has the blood and flesh of Rasulullah, you do not kiss it. This is, oh Muslims, what is gone wrong with you? When Rasulullah in Hadith Qisa says, Lahmuhum lahmi wa damuhum dami, their blood is my blood, their flesh is my flesh. Have you forgotten all this, that today you have gone against and became oppressors of the Ahlul-bayt? Allahu Akbar. So this is how Imam used to practically even teach the reverence of Rasulullah and the importance of the Thaqalain. Another issue that we would like to say about this particular reverence of things of Rasulullah. In the Indian part of Kashmir, it is still standing today. There is a masjid by the name of Masjid Hazrat Bal. There is a masjid, a huge masjid by the name of Masjid Hazrat Bal. What does it mean? Hazrat has been given as a title. Bal is referring to a strand of hair of Rasulullah, which they believe in their history, that when the early migrants came from Medina to Kashmir side to the Indian continent, they had come during the time of Rasulullah and they held one strand of the hair of Rasulullah, and because of that they have built a big monument and even given it a title, Hazrat Bal. The reverence to one strand of hair of Rasulullah. Oh Muslims, what is gone wrong with us? Today you tell us that we should not even do salam to Rasulullah. When you yourselves, your own history tells us that you have revered even things belonging to Rasulullah, like the stick that Abu Hanifa kissed, like the strand of hair that Muslims in the Indian Kashmir have given reverence, and be it so. It should be in that manner, there is no problem. And when we look at it, we see that the honor, the knowledge, the akhlaq, the character of the Ahlul-bayt was something that was an attraction. Now these are accounts of how the Muslims have revered the Imam and have commented about the Imam and have praised the Imam. But there are non-Muslims also. For example, there is this 21 philosophers in the just last century. Some 30 years back, there are 21 university professors from the University of Strasbourg, France, or Germany, whichever it is. They have done a research and they have declared their paper of research, which has been translated in more than 20 languages today. That research is a small book of less than 200 pages. However, it is something very important that we must all read. It says the greatest scientist, Imam Jafar ibn Muhammad as-Sadiq salawatullah wassalamu alayhi. And in that they have done a research on the life of the Imam. And in the initial place they say that we do not accept the Shia theology that the Imams are divinely guided and that they have knowledge from Allah. That is not our belief. But how the Imam has opened the doors of knowledge is something nobody has done. And there are many, many statements that we can understand how the non-Muslims have looked at Imam. For example, he says when Imam was a young child, even from his childhood, when he was a young child, when his grandfather was the Imam, his father who was to follow in Imamat was still present, and he was a young child, and when he used to play with his friends, he had created 2 games for playing amongst the children. One was he used to ask them to bring any natural foods. And then they would sit down and he would teach them how to look at its properties and how it grows and what are its benefits and what it should be done and how it should be used. That was one. And the second one was he would bring up names, nouns, and then he would look at how to get byproducts out of those names and make them look at the verbs of it and how to use them and what are the adjectives and etc. Bringing the children's outlook towards knowledge from that very young age. This very scientists have concluded 2 very important aspects. There is a long conclusion, but 2 very important aspects for tonight. One is they say that we believe that the Shia theology and the Shia way of deen is superior most amongst all other religions. Why? Because it is the only religion which allows you to debate, to ask, to answer according to logical ways that have been set down by Allah. That is one. And the second one, they say, there is no scientific progress in the world whose basis does not originate from Imam Jafar as-Sadiq salawatullah wasalam alayhi. This honor, this knowledge, this akhlaq of the Ahlul-bayt was always an attraction to the people, but it was always a threat to the rulers. Despite the rulers having all the power, all the wealth, yet they were jealous of the Ahlul-bayt, and they always used their worldly instruments to oppress the Ahlul-bayt alayhimus salam. Why? Despite all wealth and power and instruments of oppression, they could not stop people from loving the Imams or the Ahlul-bayt alayhimus salam, because the Aimma alayhimus salam ruled upon hearts, not upon bodies. That was the Ahlul-bayt. And the dhulm, but these rulers always felt it a threat. They were always threatened by the Ahlul-bayt. Whenever there was an Imam of the Ahlul-bayt alayhimus salam amongst them, they always felt it was a threat to their power. It was a threat to their kingdom. And therefore, they always wanted to oppress the Ahlul-bayt. Though after the day of Ashura in Karbala, none could dare ask for bayat from the Ahlul-bayt. Ever. So they brought about every form of torture and oppression to the Ahlul-bayt minus force, because they knew if anyone would force the Ahlul-bayt to the battleground, he will never rise again like Yazid. And it is at this time that Mansur, the Abbasid Caliph of the time, served poisonous water to the Imam, which was so fatal that was the reason and the cause of the death of the Imam, the martyrdom of the Imam. We have today gathered to pay our respects to our seventh Imam, Imam Musa al-Qadim Babul Hawaij. Ya Imam, we are here today to say, Ya Imam, we are also sad by the martyrdom of such a great Imam and your father and the member of Rasulullah's family. And despite dispensing the poison to eliminate the Imam, the government still showed respect to the Imam. There was an announcement from the government that all government officers will attend the funeral and the burial of the Imam. Diplomacy demanded that all levels of government participate in the funeral of the Imam. People of Medina gathered in large numbers. Imam was taken from his home after ghusl and kafan and buried in Jannatul Baqi near his father and his grandfathers. Mansur could not bear the Imam in less than 5 years of his rule, and he was jealous and suspicious because of the Imam's sincere efforts of spreading truthful knowledge. Abu Basir, an elderly companion of the Imam, after the burial of the Imam, came to the house of Imam and wanted to give his condolences to the wife of Imam, Hamida Khatun. And he came to Hamida Khatun and he said that we present our condolences to you, O the family of the Imam. And Hamida Khatun narrated to Abu Basir and said, O Abu Basir, do you know the last moments of the Imam? It was the time when he was on his deathbed, when he was about to pass away from amongst us. In his final moments, he asked his entire family to get together. And when everyone was there in front of him, he says, surely remember this, our intercession will not avail one who takes his prayers lightly. Not saying prayers, even taking it lightly, our shafa'at will not reach there. Oh Mu'mineen, we need to understand this statement of the Imam. However, we say O Imam Musa al-Qadim, Abu Basir was free and at liberty to come to your family and present his condolences. But yeah, Imam, it reminds us of your grandfather, Imam Sajjad, your aunt Zainab after the day of Ashura in Karbala. On that day after the Shahadat of Imam, there was no one who came to present condolences. They came with fire. They came with the intention of looting the family of Rasulullah. They came to Janab Rabab or they came to Janab Zainab not to present condolences but to oppress them further. They came to take away their chadar from their heads, and they came to Imam Sajjad not to give him condolences but to even take away the mat upon which he was lying, such that when they pulled the mat, they threw the Imam down, face down. Ya Allah, Ya Imam, at least you had people like Abu Basir who could come and give you their sympathies. These people on the day of Ashura came to burn the tents of Fatima. The situation was such that the orphans were running about, in which Shimmer came and slept the yatima of Hussein. He slept Sakina. Sakina was tortured in such a manner that sometimes she was tied to the camel on the way to Kufa or Sham. Sometimes her neck was tied to the rope, and when that was done, the people of the Ahlul-bayt had to walk bending down because she was too young. If they would straighten themselves, Sakina's feet would not be on the ground. Sometimes she was tortured by being tested with the love of Hussein in the darbar of Yazid, and she could not bear this anymore. In the prison of Sham, she passed away. Janab Rabab was such that when she came back to Medina, she never sat under the shelter. She used to exclaim and say, how can I sit under the shade when my Mawla Hussein was under the scorching sun on the burning sands of Karbala? No one to give him kafan, no one to give him dafan, and my Ali Asghar is lying with him. My Sakina is in the prison of Sham. How can I sit under the shade? ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. ماتم حسين.